Hello and welcome to the lecture where we're going to be creating a news reader app. So the idea is that you'd come into an app like this with a bunch of news articles that you wanted to read. This one's about tech. And, if you go ahead and you tap on one of these, it's going to open up a new activity with a web browser inside of it, where then you can, scroll through and see the information that comes through. Again, look, here's one that comes through Twitter. We can see all the cool stuff there. This should be saved in an SQL database, and you should be able to get that. Now, the source for information on this, let me go ahead and open up Safari here, is a website called Hacker News. So news.ycombinator.com is where Y Combinator. Let's just search Hacker News. That's going to take us to the appropriate place. So there we go. I must have spelled something wrong through there. But this is a cool website that shows a bunch of kind of trending tech articles. And there's an awesome API for this. If you just search Hacker News API, you're going to get this awesome link to GitHub where you can go. They have detailed out what it is, that you want to do. So for us, essentially the URL call that you're looking for is you want to get the top stories. So if you just go ahead and click on this, you get a result back like this that gives you a bunch of article IDs. Then with those article IDs, you can plug them into this URL. So up here where it says 8863, that's where you'd put in whatever current news item that you want. And then you'll get like the title, the URL, and that will help you create the reader. So some important pieces of information for you to know if you're going to go out and do this on your own. Again, if you need any help, you can watch me, but I think you can do this. Go ahead, hit pause now. All right, let's go ahead and get started with a new Android Studio project. We're just going to go ahead and call this one the News Reader. Okay, go ahead and do all our standard default configurations and get this party started. So really the first thing that we want to dive into with this app is we want to be able to access the Hacker News API, get to figure out how we can get all the stories. So let's go ahead and open up a browser and see if we can't find that Hacker News API. So I'm just going to search Hacker News API. And once I'm there, look at this. We've got some nice documentation here. And it looks like this is going to be what we need in order to get this. So the basic idea with this API is that if you want to know the top stories and if you want to see what the website looks like, go to news.ycombinator.com. There we go. And look, it kind of shows you the top. This gives you like the top 30 articles that have been upvoted here. But if you want to get that information, let's look for it. New top and best stories. I think that's what we're looking for. So if we want to do that and we look at this API hit, it just gives us a bunch of these ID numbers. And the idea is that you take these ID numbers, and then if you ask for a specific ID item, then it's going to tell you more about it. So let's see if we scroll up to the top here. I believe this is it. Yes. So if we give it a particular item, it's going to say, hey, this is the title. This is the URL connected with that. That's where we're going to want to load the web page. And there's also the kids here for talking about the comments and stuff. And we're not going to worry about the comments. We just want to be able to let the user go look at all the different stories there. So with this in place, this is what we're aiming towards. Let's go ahead and start building out the app. So the first step for us is we want to put a list view on the very first activity of the app. So we'll go ahead and give Android Studio a second here to load. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and go down to containers, and that list view is what we want. So let's delete the existing text view. We'll bring out that list view, and yeah, we'll just go ahead, hit all the pluses here, have that fill up the screen, and we'll simply call that a list view. Okay, like to keep things simple here when we're working with this activity. So once that's in place, this app is going to be connected to an API. So let's do this before we forget. Let's go ahead and make sure we have permission to use the internet in this app. So we're going to have a new tag here for uses permission. We want the internet. And we'll go ahead and put our closing tag there. Excellent. Now, with that in place, we can move forward with getting our list view set up. So we've done this a million times. First thing that we need is an array list. So let's go ahead and make one of those. So we want an array list of string objects, and we're going to call this the titles. And this will be equal to a new array list. Excellent. From there, we want to create an array adapter. So we'll go ahead and get one of these that we'll just simply call array adapter. And we won't set that up yet. That'll be in this onCreate. So with that in place, let's go ahead and get access to that list view. So we're going to say list view, give it the name of lowercase list view is equal to our find view by ID r.id.listView. Okay, so we've got that in place. Next thing we do is set up that array adapter. So we'll say array adapter is equal to a new array adapter. Pass forward, this is context, android.r.layout. Simple list item 1. We'll go ahead and pass it our array called titles. All right, so that gets the array adapter all set up. Then the next thing we need to do is just set the adapter. So we're going to say list view dot set adapter, and we'll pass in our array adapter. Simple enough, right? So let's go ahead and hit run. I know it's going to take a second for the emulator to get up and running, and there's really not much to look at right now because we don't have anything even in the array, but we at least want to just know that the app can work. So while that is going, let's go ahead and move on to our next big task, and that's that because we're working with an API, I know we haven't done this since last section, but we need to go create something that extends async task, right? We'll make our own download task or whatever it is that we want to call it so that we can go get the appropriate data. So while we're still within this main activity class, we want to make our own class here. So we're going to say public class, and you can call this whatever you want. I'm going to call it download task. I think that kind of just represents what we're going for. And this is going to, we're going to first use this to go get the list of all the IDs, right? Remember, where was that? All the top stories, right? That gives us all these, and then we're going to go use it to get the specific news items and whatnot. So this is going to be used in a couple different ways, but this is going to extend async, I'm spelling this wrong, async task, just like that. And we want to be able to pass in a string. We'll do null for the updates, and then we'll go ahead and have somehow open preferences. I don't know how that happened. And then we'll have it return a string at the end there. Okay, so we're going to have all those pieces, and with that in place, this should allow us the chance to go ahead and implement some methods in here, although I think Android Studio is just taking a second here because it's trying to get the emulator up and running here. But let's see if I hover over this unexpected token. No, we have an async task, and void, not null. That's why it's freaking out on me. Okay, when you think the computer's wrong, it's almost never wrong. It's almost always you. So we'll go ahead and with this, hit our red light bulb, say implement the methods. We want that nice do in background. Okay, so with this, let's go ahead and write the code so that we can then, get to an appropriate URL. So with this, first thing that we need to do is have a string set aside for the result. We'll just set that equal to an empty string. Okay. And let's check this emulator. Looks like the app is fine. There's nothing in the list view, but that's because we haven't added anything. So that's good. The next thing we need is a URL object that we will simply call URL. Then we need to create an HTTP URL connection that we will call URL connection. Excellent. And let's actually go ahead and just set that equal to null to start off. And once we have these three things in place, then we need to do a try catch where we actually try and get something from that URL and start an input stream, all that good stuff. So let's go and start a try catch. There's our try. Let's make our catch. And we're going to take an exception E. And in case something goes wrong here, let's go ahead and print it out. All right. Now inside of this try, first we are going to take a URL, our URL object here, and we're going to try and convert the string. So we're going to say new URL object just like this. Now for this, usually we'd like to change this to say URLs, kind of make it a little bit more readable here, and we'll say URLs give us the item at position 0. Okay, so that'll hopefully create a URL object. If not, the catch will take care of that. After that, we are going to set up our URL connection, and we're going to say this is equal to, we want to do our URL dot open connection. Now we got to make sure we cast this to the appropriate HTTP URL connection. Excellent. And I'm going to go ahead and close that left side, give us some space to work with here. Next thing that we need is an input stream. So we'll just do capital input stream. I'm going to call that lowercase input stream is equal to URL connection dot, and this is where we need to get the input stream. And after we've done that, we need an input stream reader. So input stream reader, we'll call that lowercase input stream reader is equal to a new capital input stream reader. And once we have that in place, we now have to insert our input stream, which we had called input stream. I mean, you do those names, it kind of helps keeps things a little bit easier to work with. All right, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and make our new int data. This is going to allow us to parse through each bit of data that we need. So we're going to say input stream reader dot and read, just like that. This is where we'll set up our cool little while loop that goes through this until we run out of information. And we'll say data not equal to -1, then go ahead and do the following. So we want to get a character for the current piece of data that we're looking at. So we're going to say cast this into a character, just take whatever's inside of data. Then we're going to take our results and say, okay, we are going to add on to you with a plus equals whatever current is. That'll slowly build up that string. And then we'll take our data and move on to the next one by saying data is equal to our input stream reader dot read, which just essentially takes us to the next item. All right, so once all of this is done, we're going to go ahead and log out this information. So let's just do a log I, and we'll just say URL content, and then we'll go ahead and specify whatever it is that we got back in the result. So go ahead and specify that right there. We also want to make sure that we actually return what we get back from that. So, because right now we're just saying return null. But after we've gone through the whole while loop there, we'll go ahead and return the result just like that. Okay. So with this in place, we want to, test it to see if it works out. So let's go ahead and move up to our onCreate. And let's see, we are getting an error here because we are returning before that. It's saying it's an unreachable statement. Thank you, Android Studio. The order of that does matter. But now we can go to this onCreate method and we can get some information. So before we set up this array adapter and all that good stuff, let's go ahead and make it so that we can create a new download task. And let's in fact just do this before all the list view and all that. We want to keep these things together. In fact, I'm just gonna kind of get rid of some of the spaces so we know that's a group. So we want to start a new download task, which I'm going to call task, and I'm going to set this equal to a new download task, just like that. Once we have that in place, we're going to have to do a try catch for executing this. So again, go ahead and get that set up. Okay, with all of that in place, we want to take this task that we just created and we're going to do dot execute, and we're going to pass in a string. So remember, this is where we first want to try the Hacker News URL to go and get all the top stories. So let's go back to Safari here. And remember, we want to scroll down until we get that call that gives us all the latest stuff. So let's see, new, top, and best stories. So this one right here, there's top stories, news stories, best stories. I think top stories is what we're looking for. So if we go ahead and click on this, that's the URL that we're looking for. So let's just go ahead and copy this URL exactly. And we're going to come back to Android Studio and simply paste that in right there. Okay. So with that in place, let's go ahead and run this. We should see in Logcat, because we are logging it down here, all those, the big string of IDs, which then we need to go get the information for. So let's open up Logcat here, and we'll scroll. Let's see, and look at that URL content. Look, there's all those IDs, and they just go and go and go and go and go. So that's great. We're at a pretty good point here, right? Like we have all these IDs. Really, the next step for us is we need to go take this information and then go get the actual news stories for them. At least the URL of that story, the title of that story, and then from there we can go get the actual HTML for it. But the next step, we need to get like the title and the URL. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and move back to our main activity here. As we're going through this data, we get it back as a string, but we actually want to process that as some JSON data, right? And so let's go ahead after this while statement. We are going to create a JSON array, and let's just go ahead and call this maybe just lowercase JSON array. Say this is a new JSON array, and we're going to pass in our result string. So the idea here is we're going to take this string that is an actual array of things, but actually turn it into a JSON array so that we can loop through stuff. So we kind of have to choose how many different items we want to work with. I know we get back, I think the API said 30, but let's keep things simple and just work with 20, because the more things that we have, the more things we have to download, and we can kind of just be a little bit of tough work. And we can, in our testing, keep it at a low number, and then in the actual app, you can bump it up. That's the nice thing about making a variable like this. You can always change what it should be. But let's just go ahead and call it something like number of items. We'll set this equal to 20 for now. And then what we're going to do is let's do an if statement, and we're going to check and make sure that we have at least enough of these. So we're going to say, all right, if JSON array dot length is less than 20, then we want to take our number of items and set that equal to JSON array dot length. So for some reason, I don't think this would happen, but we get back 15 items, right? So we're saying, okay, if there's less than 20 items, then we need to say the number of items is equal to whatever the length is. So this is just kind of putting a max cap on things and just making sure everything's okay there. Now, once we have that in place, let's do a for loop where we can loop through all of these items. So we'll get our for loop set up. Let's do our classic where, we have the int I and, moving through. So we're going to say int I is equal to 0. And while I is less than the number of items, we want to do I plus plus. Okay. So with this in place, let's go ahead and fill in the rest that we need here. So the first thing that we want to do through when we're looping through is we want to see what items it is that we can find. And the first thing that we got to do is we got to get the article ID. So we're going to say string article ID, and we're going to set this equal to our JSON array dot and get the string at whatever particular index that we're at. So we'll just put I right in there. So for example, if we're looking at the API, this will grab the very first item right here. So once we have that in place, let's get back to Android Studio here. The next step that we want to do is we want to get the URL for the particular article. So or for that particular ID. So we're going to say URL is equal to a new capital URL, and inside of here we want to pass in a string. So let's go back to the API. We'll just hit our back button real quick, and again, remember, if we scroll up to the top, we're looking for something like this, right, where we can give some sort of ID. In this case, it's 8863, and so it's going to give us back the title, the URL, all that good information. So we want to copy this URL, come back to Android Studio, paste that in, but instead of having this 8863, this should be whatever article ID is. So we'll go ahead and break up the string right there, and we'll just do a plus in between the two of those, okay? And the thing that we want to add right smack dab in the middle is our article ID, okay? So that gives us a new URL with this article ID ready to go grab that particular piece of information. Then we're going to want to run this basically the same code that we had before, right? We want to make a new URL connection and, you know, get this data, do the input stream reader, all that good stuff. So let's just go ahead and copy that big chunk and we'll paste it down below. Now we don't need to recreate the input stream, so we'll just go ahead and delete that. Again, input stream reader. We're just going to go ahead and make it so we're not recreating those for the first time. Same thing goes with data. And then we can go through, read all the stuff, and if this all worked, we should be able to get some article info. So we're going to go ahead and log out information about the article. So we'll say article info, and we're going to go ahead and spit out whatever result is here. Okay. Now I'm sensing something that we're going to have a problem with, and that's that after we've completed this, if we keep changing what this is, it could get confusing with the result stuff, right? Especially if we're trying to return result after that. So let's say rather than result, we're going to make a new string that's going to be called article info. So let's make a new string. I'm going to call it article info, and I'll set this equal to an empty string. Okay. And then we'll take this article info and we'll do that, and then we can print out whatever article info is supposed to be. And that will just make things a little bit easier to work with here. So with that in place, let's go ahead and run our app, see what it looks like. Okay. So go ahead and get Logcat open here, ready to rock and roll. Wait for our emulator to open up. Okay, so here it comes, and boom, look at that. We are printing out a ton of stuff. So it went and got, you can see at the very end there, print out results, which was all the IDs. But then it also went and got all these new stories. How to explain your tech job to your family during the holidays. That's kind of funny. Ditching Go for Node.js. Lightning makes new isotopes. I have no idea what that's about. Ethereum now handles more transactions than all digital currencies combined. Oh, that's kind of cool. And that's why I like Hacker News. You know, there's all sorts of interesting stuff on here. But we now got these articles, and really just the next step for us is we want to pull out two pieces of information. That's the title and the URL. Those are the two pieces of information that we're looking for. So let's go ahead and write the code to grab those. All right, so let's go ahead and down here, rather than just printing out the article info, let's go ahead and parse through this information. So our first step is going to be to turn this into a JSON object. So let's go ahead and type out JSON object, and we'll just call it lowercase JSON object, and we'll say this is equal to a new capital JSON object, and let's pass in the article info, right? That's that string that we've just compiled that we had logging out. So once we have that piece of information, then let's make sure we have both a title and a URL ready to rock and roll. It's important that we check this because, you know, for some instance, maybe one of the articles doesn't have a URL or something like that. We want to make sure that that is the case. So we're going to say, we're going to check on our JSON object that we have. We're going to say .is null, and we're going to check it for a particular item. So in this case, we're going to say title. So we're going to put the exclamation point to say, as long as this is not null, and we also want to confirm that the URL is there. So we're going to do exclamation point JSON object dot is null. And again, we'll pass inside of here lowercase URL. All right. So with that in there, we now know for sure that there is a title and a URL that we can work with. So we can go ahead and pull those two things out. So let's first make a string for our article title. All right, and we're going to set this equal to our JSON object, and then we want to get the string for title, all lowercase there. Okay. Next, we want to go ahead and get the article URL, so we're going to do a string article URL, and we're going to say that this is equal to our JSON, not array, JSON object dot get string. In this case, we'll pass in lowercase URL and a semicolon. So with those two pieces in place, let's go ahead and log this out, make sure we're getting what it is that we're hoping for. So we'll say log I, and we're going to say title and URL. And then the second piece that we'll provide in there is the article, got to spell it correctly, article title. And no, I didn't spell it correctly over here, article title. Title plus the article URL. So we'll have those two pieces of information that we'll go ahead and print out. And man, I'm really botching it here on the spelling, but there we go. That's finally going to show out that information. So let's go ahead and run this and make sure that we're getting the title and the URL all printed out. And so if we have that, that means we have those two pieces of information. Really, just the last step for us is that we have to, go download that information. So let's get Logcat opened up here, and oh, looks like our app already opened up. And there was our content there. And here we're printing out, this looks like it's from last time. Let's go ahead and run this one more time. So we'll run this. We didn't see a change down here, so we need to reconnect this to the new emulator. There we go. Now, after doing this, look at that, for title and URL, we've got these beautiful titles, and then we've got the URL showing up. That's exactly perfect. This is what we wanted. This is looking great, okay? So now that we have that in place, like I said, the next step for us is really, and I know we've done a lot of internet data processing here. We just got to do one more step, and that's that we're going to take this title and this URL, and we're going to go download the appropriate information for this. So after we've got the article URL, the article title, we're going to pass at least the URL into our URL object. We're going to say URL is equal to capital URL, and inside of there, we're going to pass the article URL. Excellent. And with that in place, we're going to reset up that URL connection. So we'll say here, and let's see, this needed to be a new URL. That's why we're getting some errors there. URL connection will take that URL that we just made and say .open connection. And once we've gone ahead and done that, we're going to have to cast this. So we'll say HTTP URL connection. Looks good. All right, once we have the URL connection, then we have to get our input stream. So we're going to say input stream, you are equal to our URL connection dot input, get input stream. Then once we have that, we need to set up the input stream reader. So we're going to say input stream reader is equal to, and this is where we'll get a new input stream reader, and we're going to pass in our existing input stream. Excellent. Then after we've done this, then we want to get our data set up. So we're going to say data is equal to our input stream reader dot read. Okay, so we've gone ahead and gotten that in place. Then we need to have a new string that represents the HTML from the article. So maybe let's call this article content, and we'll say this is equal to an empty string, at least for the time being. And then we'll just do our classic while loop here. This will be the last one for us, where we go ahead and get all the data. So we're going to say as long as data's not equal to -1, because that means it's stopped out, then we're going to go get a character, which we're going to call current. We're going to say this is equal to char data, and then we're going to add this on to our article content. So we'll say article content plus equals, and we're going to pass on current there. And then we'll finish up by saying, hey data, you need to go ahead and move on to the next one. So we'll get our input stream reader say .read. Okay, so that'll go ahead and get that information. Now, to make sure that this is all working, we want to go ahead and log out this information. So we'll say log.i, and we'll say, maybe I'll just call this HTML, and we want to pass forward the article content. Now this is going to take a little bit of time because you know, these, when we're if you think about this, we're first hitting the API for all the article IDs. Once we do that, we go and get all the information for each of those IDs, which gives us a title and a URL. And then now we are going forward and getting all the HTML for each of those individual websites. So there's a lot of different calls that are kind of going out to the internet. So I mean, you'll actually see if we just open up Logcat here, it's expected that this is going to take a little bit of time, and you know, we might not see results immediately. So go ahead and give this a second here to get to its place, and we'll come back. So it took some time, but finally we got a ton of HTML showing up here, and this is great because this means we went in for each of those individual articles. We have the title now, we have the HTML that we got via the URL. We data-wise have everything that we need. Now, in order to finish our app, we need to make a list view that shows all the different articles, and that needs to be stored inside of our SQL database, which at this point we don't even have an SQL database to work with. So there's a couple of steps that we've got to go, and even from there we've got to go create a new activity so that when someone wants to view this, that they can go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and get to the top of the page here. There's a few extra things that we want to set up here. So the first one is we want to have a database where we can store all this information. So let's make a new SQLite database, and we're going to go ahead and call this articles DB. Okay, so we're just going ahead and saying we want to define that. Then we'll come down here, and in our actual code, we'll go get this all set up. So, and let's do this before we go and hit any sort of download tasks, because we want to make sure the database is ready before we go and do that. So what we're going to do is first take our articles DB, and we're going to set this up by saying we want this to be equal to this.open or create database, and we'll just give it the name of capital articles. Okay, and we want to pass in capital mode private, and we also want to say null here at the end because we don't need any sort of special handling. All right, with that in place, the next thing that we need to do is execute a statement to say, hey, you know, let's go ahead and get a table set up for all this. So articles DB dot execute SQL, and the string that we're going to put inside of here is, and be ready because we got a lot of typing, create, and make sure this is all caps. I'm going to turn on my caps locks to make this a little bit easier. Create table if not exists, and now in lowercase we're going to say lowercase articles, back to our uppercase, or excuse me, we're going to do parentheses to say what this is going to consist of. So we're going to have ID, which we want to be in integer, and not only that, it's also going to be our primary key. Remember, we learned about that, does some auto incrementing stuff, really great. Next thing that we're looking for is we want to have the article ID, and we're going to have this be just an integer. Okay, we've got that in place. The next thing that we're looking for is a title, which that's just going to be a varchar, aka the database's version of a string. And then the last thing that we need is content. This is essentially going to hold that string of HTML, and this is also going to be a varchar. So we'll just go ahead and plop that in. So with all that information in place, we now have everything that we need in order to get the table all set up. Okay, and then, you know, we want to go about creating, you know, this is fine now to go hit up this URL for all that information. So the next step for us is, after we've gone and gotten that information, we need to be storing that inside of the database. So we're going to move down here all the way till where we've gotten our article content, because that means we've essentially gotten everything that we need. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a string of some SQL content that we want to do, and I'm going to show you how to pass some data into an SQL line of code. This will be pretty neat. So we're going to make a new string that we'll just call lowercase SQL, and this will be equal to, we'll say insert into lowercase articles. Make sure you have the S on there, and we're going to pass through what we want to add. So we want to say what the article ID is. We also want to say what the title is going to be, and we also want to specify the content. Okay, so if we scroll up here to the top, and we had set this up right, we don't need to set the ID, but these three things, article ID, title, and content, we do want to set those up. So we'll say those are the three things that we want to pass in, and then if you remember, you have to say values and then specify in parentheses what it is that you want to add. And this is where things get a little bit tricky. We're going to say question mark, comma, question mark, comma, question mark. And what we're going to do is we're going to then add in appropriate information in here so that it will go and add the appropriate data. So with this in place, we're going to create a new kind of object called an SQL light statement. So SQL light statement, and we can just go ahead and call this statement and say this is equal to our articles DB dot, and we want to do compile statement, and we need to pass it some sort of string. And so that's going to be our string here called SQL. And once we have this in place, we're now going to start passing in information. So we're going to say statement dot bind string, and this is where we're going to pass in the appropriate information. So you need to say what position you're passing this in at, and it's not a zero-based counting, it's a one-based counting system. So we're going to start with 1. That's the index, and then we need to provide a string. So in this case, the first thing that we want to pass through is an article ID. So we're going to pass through article ID. Simple as that. And I'm going to just go ahead and copy and paste this 2 more times so I can appropriately add in title and content. So for index number 2, which should be title, we're going to go ahead and pass in article, not sarticle, article title. Excellent. And then for index number 3, the last one, we want the content. So that is going to be this article content that we just took all that code to get. So we're going to take article content and pass that in. Okay. So once we have this, we're going to take this and say statement.execute. And you might be wondering, well, why do we go through all the worry of passing these things here into an SQLite statement and having to put those in that positions? Well, because like we could have just said, hey, make some mega string and put this all together. But by doing this SQLite statement, it protects our database in case we accidentally put something in that would try to delete our database, because this is live code that's going into our database. There's other things that we'd want to consider here that with HTML, there might be something that breaks the string up. There's just all sorts of situations in which we would want to make sure that this is all okay. So with that in place, this should insert everything we need in there. And each time we run the app, we want to make sure that if we're going to go hit up all this information, that before we do, we clear out the table. So let's go ahead, and before we go loop through each of the items, let's just execute a statement. So we're going to say articles db.execute SQL. And inside of here, we're going to say all caps delete from, and we want lowercase articles. That's the table that we're going to be deleting from. Okay. So with all this in place, we should be in a pretty good position for storing some information, but we need to have a way to update our app whenever we get this new information. So we are going to make a new method here. So let's do this below the onCreate. We're just going to say public void, and the function or method that we want to create is called update list view. So this is going to allow us to just make sure everything's all up to date, ready to rock and roll. So the first thing that we got to do is, we essentially want to get stuff out of the database, get it into the appropriate arrays, and then display that to the user. So what we're going to do first is get a cursor that we'll call C, and this is going to be equal to articles db dot raw query. Remember, this is how we pull things out. You want to say select star, which is the same as select everything from articles, okay? And we'll go ahead and for the second parameter, we're going to pass in null. And once we have that in place, we want to go ahead and get, have a way to get to the content and the title. Those are the main two things that we want to pull from our database. We also have an article ID, but we're not particularly concerned about that right now. So we need to make indexes for those. So we're going to say content index is equal to c.get column index for content, just like that. And we're going to say int title index is equal to c.get column index for title. All right. So now that we have those two things in place, we're going to go ahead and start moving through. So the first thing that we want to check here is we're going to do an if statement. Make sure that we have something that we can appropriately do. So we're going to say c.move to first. So as long as that works out, we're going to first take our titles array and we're going to go ahead and clear everything out of there. Next, we need to have a content array list. So we're actually just going to go ahead and copy this right here, paste it down below. We need to make a new array list called content. All right. So with that, we're going to say content dot clear out whatever we have inside of there. Then we're going to do a dual while loop. So this is a little bit different from a while loop in that we do the code first, then we do the while statement to check if things are working. It's essentially the same. It just sort of checks things in a different order. So we have a do with curly brackets and then a while where in parentheses we're checking a particular situation. And this one we have c dot move to first. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then what we want to do inside of here is just fill up those titles and content arrays. So we're going to say titles dot add, and what we want to add is c dot get string, and we are going to pass in the title index. Boom, just like that, we're filling it up. Then we're going to take our content array list dot add, and we're going to add in c dot get string, and we're going to pass in the content index. So we'll go ahead and put in those two pieces of information, and once we've looped through all those things, we want to go ahead and take our array adapter and say, hey, you've got some new information, so we're going to do notify dataset change, and that should prompt it to say, hey, I need to go update all of this information. So now that we have this function called update list view, we have to call it in the appropriate places. So the first one is going to be inside of our onCreate. So after we've got all this information up ready to rock and roll, like the databases and whatnot, we're going to go ahead and say, all right, update list view. That's one place that we're going to want to run this. And the next one is if we scroll down on our download task class here, we're going to go all the way down here. So, the big function that we have here is called do in background. Remember, there's another function that we can add, which is called on post execute, and this gets run at the very end. So with this, we're going to just call update list view right there, because that's saying, hey, after everything's finished, let's go ahead and update list view so that we get all the appropriate information. So big moment of truth here. Let's go ahead and give this a run. Like I said earlier, this will be a little bit tricky because there's so many different articles it's got to go out and get there. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get that information. But and let's see, no such table articles. I believe I've done some misspelling here. So let's go ahead and make sure I've got this all correct. Let's see, articles, that should fix it. Let's go ahead and give this a run, see what we get now. Okay, luckily SQLite has some pretty good logs so that when I make some mistakes, there's a chance for me to recover from those. So we'll have our app open here. because the idea is that, you know, as new information comes through that we'll get that, although we're going to have to wait for all the data to come through. So this could take some time. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and come back when this is finished. Would you look at that? My spelling killed me again. In our insert statement, I accidentally misspelled articles. So I've got articles one more time, and I'm going to, looks like I've misspelled this a couple of places. So article ID, that all looks fine. I've got articles there. Let's make sure up at the top here that that's all good. Articles, yeah. Okay, articles, article ID. Yeah, this should be all better. I wouldn't be surprised if we come back here, but again, let me pause. This now should go get that data. So I decided while we're waiting for this to load here, it might be worth going ahead and moving on to the next step and just working on that next activity that we're going to create. So let's go ahead and inside of our app here, let's make that new activity. We'll say File, New Activity. Let's just pick one from the gallery. We want an empty activity, and let's go ahead and give this a name of maybe something like Article Activity. So once we go ahead and hit Finish on that, this is going to add that new activity for us. And this new activity, this is where we're going to display the HTML, right? So the idea here is that, you know, there's this list of articles. You can see all the titles of them. And if someone taps on one of these, then you could go over and see the HTML for it, right? And so when they're all listed out, we would want to see that information. So let's go ahead and visually get working on this, and then we'll do the code side of things. So let's give ourselves a little bit of space to work with here. And all that we're essentially wanting to do here is we just want to have a nice big web view inside of all of this. So let's go ahead and see, there we go, inside of containers we've got a web view. So I'm just going to pull that out. Luckily, naturally, just fills up almost the whole screen. So let's just go ahead and add some constraints to make that official. And I'll just give this the ID of web view. That should be appropriate there. Now, with this information in place, we're ready to go ahead and actually write some code for this. So the first thing that we want to do is get access to that web view. So we'll say web view, and we'll just call it web view is equal to find view by ID, capital R dot ID dot, and then we want to get web view. There we go. The next thing that we want to do is we want to get the web view all set up. So we'll say web view dot, and we're going to go ahead and say get settings. And on this, make sure our JavaScript is enabled. So set JavaScript enabled equal to true. The next thing that we want to do with this web view is we want to say, okay, set web view client. And remember, this is important because if not, it's going to launch the user's own browser, which we want the user to be able to quickly move back and forth here. So we're going to say new web view client. Guess I got to capitalize that. New web view client. And there we go. That's enough to get started there. Now, with this information in place, there's a little bit more that we have to do. So the big one is we have to have an intent created that's going to contain some information about you know, the URL, or rather the HTML that we're passing over. So let's go back to our main activity, and we're going to go to our onCreate method here. So at the top, after we've, you know, created the list view and set the adapter, all that good stuff, then we have to make it so that if someone clicks on one of these, that we, you know, can move over to this new activity. So we're going to say list view dot, and then we want to set on item click listener. Make sure you don't do the long click listener, or else you're going to be trying to never get anything. So we're going to say new. We want to do adapter view on item click listener. Gives us this nice function to work with, and we want to make a new intent. So we're going to say intent. We'll call intent is equal to a new capital intent, and within that we want to get the application context. After that, we want to get, say, where it is that we're moving to, and that is the article. I'm going to misspell this again. We want to go to the article activity dot class. Okay, so now the intent knows where it's supposed to go to. Now we want to give it the HTML that it needs to move forward. So we're going to say intent dot, and we're going to put extra. And the extra that we want to put in there, it first has the name of content. Remember, this is the HTML. Now to get that HTML, it's as simple as just saying content, which is our array list, dot get, and we're going to pass in I, which is the index of whatever item in the list view it is that they tapped on. So with those two pieces in place, we can go ahead and start the activity by simply passing in that intent, and then it should move us over to the new activity, right? And then we can see that information. So let's go ahead and move over back to article activity. And once we are here, this is where we can write some code to go ahead and get the intent and have that information displayed. So we're going to say, we're going to make a new object called intent, which should be equal to get intent, just like that. And then we're going to say WebView.load data. And this is where we'll go get the information from the intent. So we're going to say intent.getString extra. We're looking for lowercase content there. That should have all of that. And then we're going to simply say the type is a text/HTML, all lowercase there. And the encoding is going to be UTF-8. Okay? So with that in place, this should be all the information it needs. So when someone clicks on one of them, that will come through to the next screen and have it displayed in the web view. Now, an issue that we're going to have here, as you can see, we still haven't gotten this list view to show up. Like it's really taken a long time to go get all this HTML data. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and rerun this app, except there's one important thing I wanted to do there. So I'm going to wait till this starts, and I'm going to hit the stop button. Because we should already have some information saved, I'm going to go ahead and hit the X here, try and stop this process. There we go. So if we can go back to our main activity here, what I want to do is this next time we run the app, I don't want to do this task.execute because we already have some information saved inside of the database. So let's go ahead and run this now. And this time, we're not going to go hit the API because hopefully we have some of these articles saved inside. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like on our emulator. And oh, we've got an issue here. So there's a couple of issues that we need to fix. The first one is here inside of this update list view. When we say c.move to first inside of this while loop, it needs to be c.move to next. When I said c.move to first, it just kept looping over and over and over, and that's why we had memory issues. So that needs to be fixed. But also in this update list view, we say arrayAdapter.notify dataset changed. Yet up here in our onCreate, we are creating the array adapter here, and we are calling update list view up there. So we're going to wait and call this update list view all the way here at the bottom so that we don't run into those issues. It can, then appropriately talk to array adapter. So with those two pieces of information in place, and now that we've got all the activity set up that we can move to the next activity, let's run this emulator one more time. Hopefully we'll get some good results here. And you can see we didn't have the full 20, but it was taking a while. So let's see SSH versus OpenVPN for tunneling. We go ahead and click on this. It opens up a new web browser, and look at that. We can go ahead and move through and see all that information. I fell down a bit of a runes research rabbit hole today. Let's go ahead and see what this is all about. And look, something here from Twitter. Now, it's important to note that our app has access to the internet, and that's how it's downloading all these images and stuff. If we, you had downloaded all these articles to go view at a different time and you didn't have data, like you wouldn't see these images, you wouldn't see the cool CSS, JavaScript that comes along with these. So it's an interesting point. For example, this one, I don't know if that's just what the website looks like, but we're not seeing all the data come through. So I'm not sure what the situation is there. Maybe just the website's broke because everything else is looking good here. But there you have it. So we have a completed Newsreader app. Again, we had a little bit of an issue with it taking a long time to download those articles. You'll learn as we move through the course more efficient ways to go about doing that. But hopefully you enjoyed learning that.